Welcome back to Tortoise&Plume. In this video, I will construct an 18th century cap. Our first task is going to take the longest time to complete. We will be rolling the hems of our ruffle. To hand sew a rolled hem, we will first fold down our raw edge. I will be folding the raw edge in by 1/8 of an inch. I like to mark out my seam allowances on my thumbnail with a Sharpie. If I'll be working with the measurement for a while, I will also seal it in with clear nail polish so it doesn't wash off. I like to prep the entire strip before I start sewing so that I don't have to jump between folding and sewing. Once the 1/8 fold is complete, I will begin sewing down my rolled hem. I like to start in the fabric right at the folded seam allowance. Then I will catch the fabric at the edge of the fold, taking only a few threads. I will then cross back to the fabric at the raw seam allowance and catch a few threads. I will cross back over and take a few more threads from the edge. It will start looking like a zigzag. I will repeat this process for about 5 to 7 zigzags. Then I will firmly hold the end of my ruffle and pull my thread gently so that the hem rolls itself up. It's important to pull gently or the thread could snap. It's also important not to take too many zigzags at a time as the roll could come out lumpy and uneven. I will continue to sew the rolled hem. This is an easy technique, though it is time-consuming. A third hand or a sewing bird makes this process a little smoother. All edges will be hemmed, though you can leave the selvage unhemmed. Once the ruffles are done, mark the center point on the wrong side of the ruffle where the hem is visible. Make sure this mark is small but fairly visible. Next, we'll be assembling the wings. You should have 4 wing pieces to make 2 wings. The first step is to align 2 wing pieces with right sides together. Pin these pieces. Using a combination running and backstitch, seam these pieces together along the curved edge using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Once the wing has been sewn, you will want to clip the curve of the wing, cutting to but not through your seam. Once the curves are clipped, you can turn your wing. I like to finger press my seam allowance to one side while turning the wing right side out. This helps the seam lie flat. You can then press the wing flat and use your presser tool to get everything crisp. Repeat for your second wing. Now we'll get our cap components sewn together. First, you will mark out the back slit for your cap. Mark up 2.5 inches and draw a cutting line. This allows for you to easily put on your cap and allows for some sizing adjustment. You will also want to make a mark 1 inch from the cutting line on each side. cut your cutting line. This slit will have a rolled hem similar to our ruffle edges. Instead of a 1/4 inch total, this total roll will be about 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch. Press down your hem allowance. Your roll will become narrower as you get to the top of the opening, and that's fine. We'll be using a buttonhole stitch for the top of the opening. Now we'll roll the hem. This technique is the same technique we used for the rolled hem for the ruffles. Use the raw edges as your guide. Take a few threads from the fabric beneath the raw seam allowance, then cross over to the folded edge and take a few threads. Continue for 5 to 7 stitches and then pull the thread gently to roll up your edge. Once you get to the top of the opening, you will not have enough fabric to roll the hem. At this point, you can use a buttonhole stitch. Simply wrap the thread around the raw edge very closely together. Insert your needle about 1/8 to 1/16 from the edge and wrap around the raw edge, then insert your needle close to the previous stitch. The closer the stitches, the more secure. A variation is to insert your needle halfway, wrap the thread loop around the point of the needle, pull the needle out, and taut. Then continue on to the next step. This creates a tiny thread bridge between each stitch. Once you have enough fabric to roll the hem again, switch back to that technique. Now it's time to gather our crown. First, mark the center front of your crown. This will be directly opposite from the crown slit. Simply fold your crown in half along that opening. Mark the opposite edge with a pencil. Gather from one 1-inch pencil mark near the slit to the other. To gather, I like to use pale blue silk thread. Silk thread doesn't leave thread marks in your fabric, and the pale blue color isn't as noticeable in white fabrics if you can't get it all out. Sometimes that happens. The gathers aren't measured, but end up being about 1/3 to 1/2 of an inch. I like to gather onto my needle and sort of eyeball it. I use a size 9 sharp needle, so gathers aren't too large. Once you've basted your gathering stitch, gather the crown and leave the tail thread long. You can now pin your wings to the crown with right sides together. Mark off 1/4 of an inch from each end of the wing. This is your seam allowance mark. Pin one point of the wing at the seam allowance mark to the center front point. Pin the other end of the wing to the end point of your gather. Once you have everything pinned and the gathers nicely spaced, you can knot off your gathering thread and trim the tail. Once this is done, you can repin your wings. Only pin the inner layer of the wing to the crown. The wings will look a bit like pockets when they're pinned to the crown. Once both wings are pinned to the cap, you can sew the wing to the crown. I like to use a combination running and back stitch with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You can now rip out your gathering stitch. To finish the wings, fold down the seam allowance 1/4 of an inch and pin all layers together. At the center front, where both wings overlap, you will need to fiddle a bit with folding down the seam allowances. Once those are pinned, you will finish the back opening of the cap. Fold the little tab down 1/4 of an inch. Using snips, cut the fabric just to the fold next to where the wing attaches. This will allow you to neatly fold up the back edge of the wing. Finger press the fold and open. Fold the seam allowance under to finish the hem. Pin in place. Whip stitch the wing lining down. These stitches can be a bit more spaced, but be sure that you only pick up a few threads of the crown fabric. This will make sure that the stitches won't be visible from the outside. Whip down the hem for the back opening, making sure that your stitches are close together to prevent fraying. We're at the home stretch. We're just going to finish off the cap. First, we will be gathering the ruffle to the very edge of the wing. You can pleat or gather, and for gathering, you can use a gathering stitch like we used on the cap crown, but I really dislike that method, so I'm going to show you another method. The first step is to find the center point of the wing and finger press this point. I don't like to use marking, as the fabric will be joined edge to edge and any markings might be visible. Align the center marking of the ruffle, right sides together, to the center point of the wing. Pin this. Pin the edges of the ruffle to each end of the wing. From here, we will divide our ruffle and wing sections. Fold the ruffle section in half, fold the wing section in half, and pin the center points together. Then take the smaller segments, fold each in half, and then pin together. This method will give you even gathers for your ruffle. Whip stitch the gathers to the wing along the edge using 2 stitches per gather. I thought the gathers were too large, so I further split each one. Feel free to do this as much as you like. This will take a while, but I do recommend 2 stitches per gather. The last step is to create eyelets for a tie on the back of the cap. This will help with size adjustment. I eyeballed my eyelet placement, used an awl, and sewed a simple buttonhole stitch with heavy linen thread. Once that is done, you can tie a length of twill tape, yarn, or ribbon through the eyelet to adjust the cap circumference. With that, our cap is done. I like to wrap a ribbon around where the wing and crown meet, just to secure the cap to my head further. It's also a way to show off a beautiful ribbon without having to buy a large quantity. Wearing a cap is both historically accurate and saves time getting ready. A simple bun with your hair pulled back and smoothed in the front looks simple and accurate. Thank you for watching, and happy sewing!